Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. Through this 139th episode of POWERchat, the TV show presenting you for last 3.5 years, we have been talking about the expert insights on different issues related to development and diplomacy. Through this episode today, we are going to discuss about disaster risk reduction strategies and actions during COVID-19 or the pandemic crisis. Joining us today is Dr. Suman Kumar Karna. He is the disaster risk reduction specialist. Also, we are joined today by Mr. Dinesh Gurung, Program Manager of Humanitarian Response and Disaster Risk Reduction at Dan Church at DCA Nepal office. Please allow me to welcome them. Welcome to the show, Dr. Karna and Mr. Gurung.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us, and I'm starting with a very general question. Your observation on the disaster risk reduction strategies. You have been into the field of disaster, flood management and development sector for a long time, both of you. How do you observe the scenario as such, the disaster risk reduction strategy at the normal time? Disaster is taking place at different occasions, but at this time, the world is suffered with the COVID-19 pandemic, and Nepal is also suffered, and there are many casualties, many hazards around. I'm starting with Dr. Suman Kumar Karna. Can you give us the overview of your observation about disaster risk reduction strategies and actions at the moment in Nepal? Dr. Karna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for calling me again in this POWERchat. I'm privileged to be here again. See, we are in a very special situation, which is very difficult and challenging. We have a challenge to manage dual crises at the same time. Now, in terms of my opinion, I think, to be very honest, we are not very proactive, farsighted, and smart in managing COVID-19 so far in the country. On the other hand, our preparedness for monsoon floods and landslide is also not very encouraging and satisfactory.
What are the key lapses, Dr. Karna? What are the key areas for improvement? One needs special attention on part of the government and other stakeholders.
The first thing is we need to understand that this is a very different situation. We cannot have the same conventional traditional model of disaster risk management at this moment, at this stage, because we have to manage two different types of crises at the same time. And it's very sorry to say that we have not made enough efforts to understand the linkage between this pandemic and this conventional disasters or disaster that we are expecting with this monsoon, floods, landslides, and others. So we need to understand the intersection of these two different types of disasters. And I'm sorry again that I don't see that we have made enough exercise, we have done some research, or we have, put some efforts in order to understand this linkage. And that is where the challenge I see when you take this, when we have to address this issue on the ground. Because the situation in the field is very
thank you very much for this, your opening insights. I will come back to you, and I'm going with Mr. Dinesh Gurung. Mr. Gurung, how do you observe the situation? Do you agree with the observation of Dr. Karna, or you have some other observation around? You're working with the DCA Nepal office as well. Any specific interventions addressing the needs of people during the time of crisis, especially that of the disaster response?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this, POWERchat. I completely agree with the Dr. Karna, and I would like to say we are very initial stage of crisis, particularly in the COVID. But we are also, it's a high possibility to, the multiple disaster in the same time in this coming monsoon. So the disaster is not very much natural. It proves the human-induced disaster is now recurrent and very frequent, and used devastating in the socio-economic life. So we have to rethink about the natural as well as human-induced disasters in the current situation. So the poverty, the vulnerability and poverty are very much interlinked in this situation. So we should focus on the DRR governance and building the resilience of the communities is now the key issue to challenge the current situation.
How do you see the key hazards in health emergencies of the present crisis, and what are the ways addressing them?
Yeah, actually, this kind of pandemic is very new phenomenon for Nepal. Yeah, and globally we are not very much prepared to respond this kind of pandemic. So we need to uh, uh, view the holistic perspective of this kind of pandemic. It's health issues, but it's largely impact to the socio-economic aspects too. So we need to see the holistic aspect to address this current crisis.
Well, same question to Dr. Karna. How do you observe the disaster risk reduction strategies, its linkage to the health emergencies at the moment?
See, we cannot work in silos. It's also a kind of disaster. We have to look at, this is what I have emphasized. We have to understand the linkage. We have to understand the intersects. And what is important is that the same group of people is also responsible to manage the monsoon floods and landslides, like local governments, security forces, volunteers, civil society. Yeah, and they people are already overstretched on the ground. They are overwhelmingly busy in managing the pandemic, or the COVID-19. So they need some kind of orientation, re-energization, incentiveness, and they need to present themselves in a very different way when it comes to managing the flood of 2020. Because you have so many restrictions. You cannot come together in a group. You have to maintain the social distancing. You have to work from a long distance mode. You have to equip yourself before reaching to the people to serve. The equipments, the other health essentials, and then there are challenges like whenever there is a flood, there are many people who get displaced. Now, where do we take normally to them? We take them to schools or to other public buildings, and those buildings are already occupied by a quarantine and isolation wards. So where are the places? Have we thought about that? I don't know. I mean, whether we have done any kind of awareness raising program in the community, whether we are doing any kind of orientation program to the people who are going to get engaged with the flood management. I don't think anything is happening on that ground. So it's going to be very challenging, and there is a risk that we may, be a cause of spreading this COVID-19 at the community level if we don't manage the flood in a different way. That is what the need of today's crisis.
Okay, Dr. Karna, can you also tell us the specific impacts into the lives of vulnerable people here in Nepal due to COVID-19? And there is dual impact into their lives, that of the disaster that you are mentioning, landslides and floods and all. And what are the key impacts to their lives and how can they be minimized?
You see, first of all, we all know that whenever there is any disaster, whether it is pandemic or a conventional disaster like floods and landslides, it's a marginalized group, poor, women, disabled. This group of community, society gets over impacted. They suffer the most because their coping capacity is limited, their financial options are limited, their knowledge and accessibility to different options are limited. So they need a special attention again in this situation. And we all know that because of this lockdown, majority of the people who are of this group have lost their livelihoods. They are out of income. And we also know that our relief distribution system is not perfect. In many places, people who are in need have not received. In many places where they received, it's not sufficient. Somewhere it is not of quality which they can really use. So these are different situations. And on top of that, with this upcoming floods, landslides, and other risks, this is going to get added. So we have to look at these communities with a special eye, with a special attention, and we have to plan some targeted interventions in order to give them priority, secure their needs, and make sure that they are less hurt with this disaster that are upcoming.
Are you trying to say that there is inadequate preparedness on part of the government in disaster risk reduction strategies at the general time and also at the time of this crisis?
Yes, very true. I mean, this is what I said. I heard that there is a preparedness plan or something is issued by the government Ministry of Home. But let me tell you, just by issuing a plan at the national level is not going to help, because our local government capacity is very ordinary. They need a hand-holding support. They cannot simply execute what you send from here. They need to be oriented. They need to be, they need to be trained. They need to be resourced. Yeah, the knowledge has to be there. So unless you do that, just by issuing a tool or a plan is not going to help.
Well, Mr.
So
Mr. Gurung,
that kind of
I'll come back
preparation
to
is
you,
not there.
Dr. Karna. I'm asking same question to Mr. Gurung, but with some specific notes on how your work is affected with the COVID-19 and what are the alternative ways you are reaching out to the stakeholders here in Nepal, and how do you observe the delivery at the moment by government entities? Mr. Gurung.
Yeah, definitely this COVID crisis created a new set of challenge for Nepal and across the world. And when we start the response, actually we faced a number of challenges, like the supply chains is not very functioning, so it's very hard to get some procure some relief item at the beginning, and at the same time it's very critical challenge to access to beneficiaries, because because of the the mobility restriction and kind of lockdown. So it's very hard to reach those those most impacted people during the response. So it's sometimes questions to the the accountability for their a direct reach to those kind of beneficiaries. So this kind of challenge that we faced during the response in COVID. So at the same time, we are trying to focus on the to support the local government effort to control and to control the spread of the virus. So we see there are a lot of challenges at the ground. There are no enough preparation, adequate preparation for the responding this kind of situation. So
well, Mr. Gurung, disaster addressing disaster requires a lot of preparations with the presence of human beings in field for rescue operations and humanitarian works. So at time when there are different guidelines of the government and WHO for social distancing and physical distancing, absence of the human beings in the field. what are the alternate ways, addressing the problems associated with any type of disaster, and how are you working on that?
Yeah, very interesting question you floated in here. I'd like to say, the local actors, local actors, including the civil society organizations, local government, and communities. The disaster management is everyone responsibilities. So the preparedness cannot be done in isolation. So we have to work together. So we have to invest more in the local actors to improve their capacity on the preparedness and response. So basically, DCA is working with the local, the organizations, local NGOs, and equip their capacity, knowledge on responding the emergencies, and at the same time, we also closely work with the local government to respond the emergencies.
Well, Dr. Karna, my question to you on the government's coordination and collaboration approach, because we have three tiers of government. So how do you observe the coordination among the different levels of government reaching out to the people addressing disaster needs?
I think again the coordination is very limited. First thing is, if you look at the national perspective, at the national level, we have an institution called NDRRMA, which is solely responsible for the overall disaster risk reduction and management in the country. Somehow that institution is not given enough space in the management of COVID-19. So COVID-19 management, in the COVID-19 management, NDRRMA is largely put out of the scene, and that created a situation where we have not been able to integrate this natural disaster and this biological disaster, that is pandemic. So that is one flaw I see at the central level. Now, when it comes to coordination with the provincial and local government, because of that absence of NDRRMA in any of the forum platforms which is leading the COVID-19 response, put provincial government and local government also out of the scene in terms of looking it in an integrated manner. They have not been so far able to understand how these two are similar to a large extent, and how these two different disasters can be managed in a complementary manner. Because COVID-19 has not only brought weaknesses or problems, there are some opportunities as well.
What are the opportunities? What are your specific suggestions to the government entities to deliver at the moment addressing these challenges?
First thing is we need to improve. We need to improve by many times this coordination, the interaction between the government concerned institutions at the central level and provincial and local government is very, very limited, very weak. Provincial government is anyway new, so we cannot expect much from them, but local governments are there, and the entire responsibility of disaster risk reduction and management is now entrusted to local government. But just by passing the responsibility will not help. Just by giving them tools will not help. What we need is, we need to resource them, we need to train them, we need to give them a knowledge, we need to tell them how to do it, and for that reason you need to plan, and you need to reach, you have to expand your outreach and go to the local government. And unfortunately, there are different, the entire world is passing through this COVID-19, struggling and managing. And there are different ideas. And if we need to manage it in an integrated manner, we have to be innovative.
Well,
there are different tools that
thank you, Dr. Karna. Mr. Gurung, I will come back to you. Linking it to your insights, I will come back to you. I'm going to Mr. Gurung. What is your learning in last 3 months? The lockdown started. And any specific approach you invented throughout your work? Your office is very active here in Nepal, working with the stakeholders. Any key learnings from this disaster, from this pandemic?
Uh, there are a lot of learnings during the response, this COVID response. One thing is we should invest much in the preparedness at the local levels and to build the local leadership for emergency preparedness and response. That means that we have to closely work with the local government, at the same time local the civil society organization and the community are the first responders in any kind of the emergencies. So we have to invest uh, much in the local actors to build their local leadership. At the same time, we have to think about the digitalizations process, remotely, how we programming the remotely and how we can do the remote kind of programming, monitoring, and kind of things, so that we maximize use of the digital platform to do the communications and the risk awareness. Like for example, we do a lot of the engagement with the media kind of radio programs. So this is a very what we have available right now is only media. So we go through partnership with the local media and raise awareness about the COVID-19. So this kind of engagement also, media engagement is very crucial during this kind of crisis. So we also learned that way. And another learning is like, the coordinations in the, different actors. There are multiple needs and gaps are in the local level. So one agency cannot fulfill those gaps. So we have to collaborate to other agencies to fulfill those gaps. So that's kind of learnings that we draw from the recent COVID response.
What are the needs of vulnerable groups during the crisis, especially that of the women, children, homeless people, jobless people, and there are issues of the gender sensitivity alongside quarantines. So any learning or any specific intervention or initiatives that you are planning to address through your work?
So basically, we are focusing in the far west of actually Sudur Paschim and Karnali province right now. And the issue is that there are multiple issues, and we know this kind of COVID impacts have not very similar to all people. There are differential impact to the different people, and people who already the vulnerable, they have greater impact of this kind of COVID. So we developed our response package based on their need and priorities. Like we also focus on the women protections, the need of protection. Like we provided the hygiene kit, and we also provided the nutrition supplementary food to the pregnant and lactating women. So we see the different needs of the people during the crisis. So our response is most diverse to address the multiple need of the people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gurung. Yes, Dr. Karna, you can continue with, but I want to stress upon how government should plan addressing to overcome the challenges of floods and landslides, because the monsoon more or less already started, and there are stories of effects to the lives of people, especially in province number 2, Karnali province and Sudur Paschim province. How do you see this situation, and what are your key recommendations addressing the immediate needs of people affected by the landslides and floods?
You see, unfortunately, 2020 is a special year, and when we are talking of floods and landslide, unfortunately, we cannot forget COVID, because this is where it is important to understand the linkage, because COVID is there and COVID is going to stay there for some time, and COVID is more life threatening than tomorrow flood. So we have to find ways out to deal with our floods and landslides within the COVID situation. So that is one thing, and that is why there are lots of innovative tools, technologies that are being used by different countries. Unfortunately, we have not been able to make any use of those simple techniques like we say risk zoning, risk matrices, risk index, indexing. We being such a diverse country, Nepal, we took a blanket approach so far. And when we locked down the whole country without really doing any simple risk mapping to understand where are the risks and how that risk level differentiates between different geographic locations. There was no need of locking down Kathmandu Valley since 3 months because there were no cases. So we did not do anything like that. We followed largely India how they are doing, and really without understanding because our situation with Indian border municipalities, our cities, our districts are different than other hill districts. So we need to understand that we did not do that. There is still a time. Now, when it comes to managing floods and landslides, we need to understand that the same community are also in threat with COVID-19. Now, there may be some pockets which are more vulnerable from floods and landslides perspective. And if they are equally more vulnerable with positive cases, then we need a different ways of dealing with them.
What is that different way? What are the alternative ways addressing the problem and providing support to the victims?
The main thing is you have to integrate, you have to, you have to be concerned of COVID situations. Like we cannot ignore social distancing. We cannot ignore the threat of community spreading when we are moving people displaced because of floods. We cannot put 100 people in one school like we do in the past because we have to maintain that social distancing, So there are different restrictions, there are different situations which we cannot ignore and still continue in the same way that we have been doing since many years. So we have to see what are the challenges that are posed by the COVID, which is intersecting with our floods management, landslide management, and mainly flood management, and we need to avoid those which will not further aggravate the situation of COVID-19. So that is where we need to be reoriented. We need to be sufficiently resourceful because I understand many of the local governments are already thinning out with their resources because they have been distributing reliefs and spending money in quarantine and so many places. Now we have seen how difficult it is to take the relief items to the people suffering. Why can't we have a provision of cash distribution, which is very much practiced in different countries, in different contexts? We can look at that. Why can't we send money directly to as Mr. Gurung said, the digitization? Why can't we ask people to open account and we can put the money directly into the account? So there are ways, what we need to exercise for it. We need to look at it carefully and see what are the best options which we can apply in this given context, because every situation context is different. We cannot have a blanket approach to the entire country. So, but problem is we are not thinking in that way. We are not making any efforts in that direction. I don't see any oriented like this. The way we are we prepared enough? Our stockpiling is good enough? Even in the list of stockpiling, I think we need many new things now. We need PPE, we need gloves, we need other things in order to send our volunteers to rescue the flood affected community.
Who is
So
responsible
where are the
for
people?
these all problems, Dr. Karna? You saying that there is no efficient rescue and delivery strategies applied by the government. Who is responsible, and how do you see the delivery of the government entities in particular, that of the local government one?
No, I would not say they are not sensitive. They are doing their job. I heard that there is already a preparedness plan or something has come out. I tried to look at, but it's still not on the website. But it has been approved by the Ministry of Home, which I just mentioned. But again, I have to, highlight that just by issuing a plan will not help. I hope that that plan has taken consideration of COVID concerns, but just by putting in the plan is not going to help. We have to expand our outreach to the local government. Within the local government also we can map out, there may be some hot spots. Not necessarily all the districts are equally severe and vulnerable to floods. So at least we can reach to those which are in the top vulnerable situations,
Well,
10,
thank you,
20
Dr. Karna.
districts,
Mr.
which is
Gurung,
not impossible.
well, there is criticism that often, non-governmental sector is engaged more onto projects rather than making these efforts more resilient. What you have to say about that? Are you planning for more resilient work that would be sustainable in relations to addressing disaster risks here in Nepal, that would address any health emergencies in future too? Mr. Gurung.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, you know, uh, right now, Mr. Karna, Dr. Karna rightly said about we are facing the multiple disaster in this motion, but particularly flood, landslide, and waterborne disease, and we have already threatened by the COVID crisis. So, at the moment, like we as a DCA, as a development organizations, closely working with the different institutions at the different level of government, at the local government and the provincial and the national level government. So right now, DCA is closely work with the uh, uh, district disaster management committee at sub 30 districts, and they continue to review their the contingency plan, considering the flood and at the same time this COVID situation. So that could be helped to operationalize their plan to responding this kind of COVID. So at the same time, we also working with the local community groups for early warning, for the monsoon preparedness activity, through the monsoon preparedness activities, and we also provide some kind of the rescue and kind of say kind of equipments, rescue equipments to the local frontline frontline responders, like there are community responders groups. There are also there's some kind of setup in the district district and local government for the responding the emergency flood emergency. So early warning kind of things, and DPRP review and the review of their contingency plan is now we are doing right now to responding this critical situation in COVID and flood response.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gurung. Dr. Karna, how do you observe the work of non-governmental sector here in Nepal, especially that of the works related to disaster risks?
No, I mean they have been doing, they have been supporting local government, provincial government every year, all the time. But that itself will not solve all the problems. They are there to extend helping hands. They cannot be a lead agency. Like Mr. Guru said, they are working in few municipalities or few districts, but we have more than few districts to serve. So government has to take the lead, and then our development partners are always there to support, but they have to take the lead, show the path. They have to create that kind of environment where development partners feel confident and encouraged to go and support to maximum number of people. And then uh, you see, as I said, I mean, local governments are responsible, and local governments needs more resources. So central national government has to understand that, and they have to send more and more resources so that they would be able to deal with this challenging situation in the same way that they have been doing. I mean, and in this time, it would be more costly to manage this flood response because you have so many restrictions. You cannot plan everything like as normal situation. So there are lots of restrictions. There are restrictions on mobility, restrictions on, movements, restrictions on reaching to people. There, so the cost is going to be high, and local government is already, getting resource poor because their resources have overwhelmingly invested in COVID management. So we need to understand that, and we need to support them, and we need to support them with resources, with technical knowledge, with with kind of we also need to develop the trust, because and it should go all the way to the community, as Mr. Gurung also said. I mean, we also need to reorient our communities that this time when how they have to deal with this upcoming flood, because the situation is different. So there need to be a plan, and the plan is not only plan, but you have to take resources, you have to take knowledge, you have to take know-how right down to the local level and the community level. And I don't think it is impossible to extend this kind of support in 20-30 districts, which are hot spots. So but then we must have that kind of will and vision to execute. And I think the development partners are always there. I don't know, I mean, how well they are engaged in COVID-19. I don't think they have been extensively engaged, but they are always there to support. So we must mobilize our, strengths. And one thing is very clear, that we could not be able to manage well if we don't collaborate. There's no option, there's no substitute to collaboration. We need to bring all the partners together and use their strengths in meeting these challenges. It's very difficult time, and one government alone cannot do everything.
Well,
so that is very
Dr.
important.
Karna, very useful insights on the work of NGOs here in Nepal. My next question to you is on ways minimizing or combating risks associated with the vulnerable communities, especially that of the women. We have been reading stories that women and children, especially girls, they are vulnerable to violence in quarantines or any rescue centers. Forget COVID at the moment, you can relate it to the disaster as well. There are cases of sexual assault, harassment, and what are your suggestions, and what are the actions that needs to be taken to end any type of harassment during the time of rescue and humanitarian work?
You see, when you don't develop your plan in a very comprehensive and robust manner, this is what happens. I mean, when we are planning, we have to have all different angles, all different lens to look at the plan. And gender lens is one important element of any plan. Gender lens or social inclusion is very important. So and this is not new. I mean, we have been doing this, protecting our special communities time and again. What you need is, you need to have that lens. You need to have that targeted, dedicated interventions. you know, and we cannot compromise on their safety and security. So if that lens is there, if that comprehensiveness in the plan is there, if that different thoughts and different versions of approach is there, I don't think we would not be able to manage. But as I said, I mean, they are adversely affected always. So they need some targeted intervention. They need some targeted support beyond the regular support, outside the regular
Well,
support.
thank you,
That
Dr. Karna. Mr. Gurung, Dinesh Gurung, how do you see this situation? How can we ensure the safety of vulnerable communities, especially that of the women and girls, engaging in rescue and humanitarian works of the disaster work?
Yeah, well, mostly, if you see the every disasters that women and children and the girls are worst affected. So they already, high, the exposure of the, the social vulnerability. So when we designing the programs, so the Dr. Karna rightly mentioned about the, the perspective. First, you should have a perspective of gender, lens. Yeah. So when you're designing the program, like for example, you do the need assessment. So how we engage those, the vulnerable groups in the need assessment process, that fitting to the whole your program designing side. So at the moment, like we are focusing to address the special need of women, children, and the the adolescent girls. Like for example, the was the hygiene items. They need the special need of women and the adolescent girls. We try to address through our response. So at the same time, there are a lot of protection issues. So we also, lobbying and advocating and supporting to separate quarantine centers for women and adolescent girls. So that we can, ensure the protection of women in the quarantine centers. At the same time, when we come with the recovery process, that there we should focus and to build their leadership and to participate in the every the process of the the recovery process. So that can ensure to their protection and other kind of needs. So this definitely approach program designing and the the perspective that together we can address the issue of protection and the gender specific needs.
Mr. Gurung, do you agree that the incidents of violence against women in rescue work, including that of the quarantines in Nepal, take place merely because of the culture of impunity? Because there are no immediate actions taken against the people engaged in harassment.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of this mechanisms at the local level and the different levels regarding the the referral mechanisms and kind of systems to address those kind of violence. But in COVID context, in the local levels, that due to the limited their the mobility and kind of restrictions that people have limited access to those kind of informations. So we recently we do some kind of the quick survey that clearly mentioned that the domestic violence is going high during these lockdown situations. So at the same time, the workload of women is increase due to this COVID. So we see these the response mechanisms and the how we address those kind of violences. So there are a lot of hotlines and the referral mechanisms, so that but people have very limited access and knowledge about that information. So we try to bridge those the systems to access, to ensure the access of those people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gurung. I'm going back to Dr. Karna. What are your key recommendations on disaster preparedness and public health response to the current pandemics?
I mean, I think, you see, at this moment, this pandemic is largely managed by the national government, whereas the disaster that we are talking is expected and it's a responsibility of the local government. Yeah. So first thing is we need to populate, or we need to strengthen the coordination between the national government and the local government. As I said, I mean, we need to look at from a holistic perspective. It is not a completely outside disaster. It is also, it can be easily looked at from the larger perspective of disaster risk reduction and management. So we need to understand the linkage, the intersects, and how this both can be managed in a complementary manner. That is one thing. Another thing is, as I said, I mean, we need to do some mapping, risk mapping. You know, we need to understand. We cannot put every district in the same baskets. Even the local government capacities are different in different places. So we need to be little wise in doing our planning, and accordingly, we need to extend necessary support from the central government to the local government. We cannot just blame them, that because they are overwhelmed. They don't have time since last 3 months, since the COVID-19 has come. So now this again new disaster they have to deal. So, and the same resources, same people, same knowledge, same know-how. How can they do that? So we need to understand the situation. We need to plan this time differently from the central government. And as I said, it's not just plan. We have to take it down to the local government. Yeah, and because they need to be reoriented completely. Otherwise, they would not be able to manage well. And not only that, we need to reinforce them, because the same lot will not do. And then we need to re-incentivize them. Some kind of incentive has to be there, and the trust has to be there, that yes, national government is there to support, and accordingly, I think we can go ahead. We have to, but when we are doing a planning, why this happened, this case of gender in quarantine. I strongly believe that the right kind of institutions were not involved in developing the quarantine, because it's a simple thing we have been doing since ages. We have developed so many camps. When any disaster happens, there also this kind of threats are there. But people do have measures to stop them, and we should not wait to find the culprit and punish. We should create an environment where these things doesn't happen.
Well, thank you,
And
Dr.
it's not a rocket
Karna.
science.
Mr. Gurung,
So
what are your key recommendations on disaster preparedness and public health response to this pandemic? You can reflect from your own work here in Nepal.
Yeah, one of the things that I, reflected, like, institutionalizations is very key, because we have a lot of policies, legal framework, institutions, but it's not translated into the actions. So one of the thing is the institutionalizations, and another thing is the localizations. Yeah, I mean the localization. It means the resource localization of resource, localization of knowledge, localizations of capacities that focus to the local government. There are other actors at the local level. So we have to invest more, and to build the local leadership is a way of for long-term solutions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gurung, and thanks to Dr. Karna as well. We are coming to the end of the show, but if you want to share something that I have left to ask you very quickly, then we'll wrap this show. Dr. Karna, anything that you want to share on this issue? Very quickly.
I think we are losing time, so we should not delay anymore. We have to gear up quickly, and we have to intervene. And intervene wisely. As I said, it has to be inclusive, it has to be collaborated, it has to be multi-sectoral and multi-dimensional, and we have to trust our local governments. But the only thing is we have to strengthen them. We have to give them supporting hand holding, and I think they would be able to do the job with other partners and stakeholders that are always there to support.
Well, thank you. Mr. Gurung, any final thoughts that I have left
Yeah,
to ask you?
The preparedness is a fundamental. So we need to holistic view and integrated solutions with the whole of society approach. So that we can address the multiple issues related to the disaster risk management.
Well, I would like to thank both of you for joining this show. We are going to wrap this show. It was pleasure talking to you, Dr. Karna and Mr. Gurung. Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.